Welcome back to the Waffle House. I'm Charlie St. Waffles, and this is tips and tricks for Helldivers 2 in no particular order. I'm just going to ramble off a bunch of tips and tricks that I think work really well for Helldivers 2. You've probably heard a few of them, but I guarantee you haven't heard all of them, so let's just jump right into it. Tip number 1, be more positive in your games. A while back, people did some studies on League of Legends, also known as the saltiest game on Earth. And they found that being positive and refusing to give in to negativity had an actual impact on their games. So when you see players make a mistake or do something silly or accidentally drop their beacon on you and wipe the team, instead of being mean to them in chat or flaming them, give them a little positivity or ignore it, give the team a little boost and continue on, and you will win more matches than not. When you see an ally dropping in sentries, I know your instinct is to run away or get behind them, but that doesn't always work. Instead, practice reprogramming yourself to hit the decks. If you lay down, the sentries cannot hit you. Unless, of course, it's a mortar gun, but we don't talk about the mortars. Tip number 3. Did you know that if you're entering in the arrows, such as on an objective or calling in the end evacuation, if you exit out, it will save your progress? And what I mean by that is, if you enter in everything except for the last arrow and then exit out, it will be there for you. So if someone says don't call in evac yet, you can still go up to it and enter in everything except for the last command, so that when you're ready for evac, all you have to do is press one button rather than entering everything under possible pressure with enemies coming. It's a little bit of time saver. Tip number 4. This one should be obvious, but I see this a lot, especially at lower levels. What works on the bots does not work on bugs, and what works on bugs does not work on the bots. They are different enemies and should be treated as such. Tip 5. There is an audio cue when you're aligning the satellites. So instead of asking someone to tell you where to point at and trying to navigate a clunky thing with compass, just turn up your sound a little bit and listen for that audio cue, and you'll know that when you have it lined up properly. Tip number 6. Certain optional objectives can be failed and destroyed, so be careful with them. Notably, things like the egg or the little squirmy backpack that you have to evacuate, they can be crushed by chargers or bile titans or thrown down a hole and permanently lost. So be careful with them if you're carrying them and where you're putting them. Tip 7. You can grab the supplies out of your own supply backpack. Typically the down arrow or the number 5. Tip number 8. Did you know you can set a key binding in your keybinds to turn the HUD completely off? This is super helpful if you want to get like cinematic screenshots or you're doing anything that you think will look cool and you want to save a little bit of video footage. Just don't bind it to something like your crouching key or you're going to annoy yourself. Ask me how I know. Tip number 9. When you're fighting the bots, the call-ins will always come from the same location. So watch carefully from where the dropships are coming from because they will come from the same location every time going forward. Tip number 10. Your location matters when calling in certain stratagems. When you're on the edge of the map, near cliffs, or have anything above you, can all impact different stratagems differently. So remember the golden rule of location, location, location. Tip number 12. If you're on fire, if you dive, the fire will immediately go out. Tip number 13. When you're working with the SEAF artillery sites, did you know you can grab all the artillery shells and put them in the place before you activate the artillery? It usually goes much smoother if you pre-plan it out and put all the shells down rather than activating and fighting while trying to rack up all the shells. Kind of adjacent to that, but we'll call it tip number 14, there are often more shells than required to complete the objective. It doesn't hurt to look around and see if there's a mini nuke or a napalm rather than throwing in a smoke. Tip number 15, kills don't matter. If you finish the game with 5 kills or 5,000 kills, all that matters is whether or not you completed all the objectives. Now, kills can help you complete objectives. However, if you're just standing in one spot and fighting and not doing anything else, you may be causing more harm than good. Tip number 16 is going to go directly against that. Did you know there can only be one call-in at a time? So if you track when call-ins are coming in because they are on a time schedule, and you see your buddies are about to start an objective and you're somewhere else on the map, if you force a call-in, that call-in cannot happen at the same time over on the objective, making it easier for them. Tip number 17. Samples are shared, so there's no reason to fight over it. Tip number 18. Level basically doesn't matter after level 20. A level 25 can play just as well as a level 150. A level 150 can be much worse than someone who's level 100. Tip number 19. Some boosters are admittedly way worse than other boosters. Bringing something like extra reinforcements when you don't need them is going to be a hindrance to your team when you could bring something more important like extra stims or full ammo on respawn. Tip number 20. Things like the EAT and the recoilless rifle do have bullet drop. Where you aim is not always where you hit, especially for faraway targets. Tip number 21. Go into your settings and turn on midnight mode. This will make it easier to hear creatures sneaking up on you. Tip 22. There's no shame in playing on a different difficulty. If for whatever reason you don't find difficulty 10 to be fun, play on difficulty 6, 7, 8, 9. There's a reason we have so many difficulties. Find the one that's fun for you. Tip 23. Certain stratagems, such as the smoke and the orbital gas strike, can actually demolish structures on their way down. You can find multiple uses for them outside their intended use. Tip 24. You can actually throw the stratagem orb a lot farther than you think. Remember that speed and movement factor into your throwing as well as the art. Tip 25. Don't forget that stims have a window of healing. If you know you're going to be taking damage soon or you're running into danger, it's sometimes helpful to pre-stim rather than stim after you take the first hit, especially if you're wearing the green armor that gives you an extra 2 seconds on top of the regular window. Tip 27. Be wary of bringing multiple eagle stratagems. While there are legitimate uses for it, remember that an eagle will only go back to rearm once you tell it to or once you've exhausted all of your eagle uses. So this means if you bring something like a 500 kg that has one use without the upgrade and something that has like 4 or 5 uses like the strafing run, your 500 kg will not start the countdown for being refreshed until you either order to go back and lose your strafing run or you use all your uses of the strafing run. This can cause a lot of bad situations and a lot less use of your stratagems. At this point, I've lost count of the tip number, so I'm going to stop saying that. Unlike other games, death does not have as big of a handicap in Helldivers 2. What this means is that if you die accomplishing a goal and you accomplish that goal and it pushes the entire game forward, that may be a good thing. A lot of people are so afraid of dying that you don't realize you get 20 call-ins per mission. Feel free to use some of those if it means you're pushing the goal forward. You'll see a lot of people who will wait to get onto the Pelican for evac and then they'll throw down an eagle or something like that. Get out of the habit of doing that. It is not a best practice. The amount of times I've seen someone post on the Reddit that they were in the Pelican ready to escape with their samples and someone decided to start throwing things down or goof around in the last few seconds and caused either a crash or a loss of samples is way too high. There is no good reason to do this. Spend some time with light, medium, and heavy armor and find which one matches your playstyle the best. For the longest time, I was huge into light armor. I like to be able to move fast, but lately using heavy armor with tons of extra stims allows me to do some pretty crazy things, and I have a lot of fun with that. So don't get stuck on one armor type. Just because you can't run as much in the heavy armor doesn't mean that it's not as fun or doesn't have just as many good uses. As of this video coming out in October, remember that there were some huge balance patches that had come out and a few more big balance patches still to come. So be careful when looking at tips and tricks video from older or any sort of tier list or anything like that, because there's a good chance that the information on there is no longer accurate. Not saying that they were wrong, but now that we've had so many big updates and changes to stratagems and weapons, that they might not be as useful as a more up-to-date or updated guide. Learn to dive more. We talked about that if you're on fire, you can dive and it will put you out, but if you're in a situation where you're being hit by almost anything or you're being spewed by bile, the only thing that's going to save your life 9 times out of 10 is diving. Even if you hit the stim fast enough, there's a good chance that it's not going to engage fast enough to save you, but diving out of the way will. Did you know the eyes of the walking factory striders are actually a weak point, and if you can hit those, it will take them down very fast, even with things like the railgun. This one's kind of obscure and it's for the solo divers, but it is something useful. You respawn if you're in a squad of 1, wherever your body is at when you respawn. This means if you can find something like a hell bomb and detonate it on yourself, wherever your body lands is where you'll respawn. So if you need to get out of an area quickly, use that to your advantage. Speaking of undetonated hell bombs, did you know there are 2 interactions you can have with them? If you do sufficient damage to them, they will immediately blow up, However, if you do light damage to them, like shoot them once with, say, a Liberator, it'll actually cause a delayed explosion. Use this to your advantage. And my final tip is read the comments down below, and hopefully the community will have added more tips that I have missed or useful information for you. Thank you for watching. As always, have a blessed day.